Welcome to the Modern Husbands podcast, where any combination of Dr. Bruce Ross, Christian Sherrill, and Brian Page host national experts who share winning ideas to manage money and the home as a team. I'm Brian Page, founder of Modern Husbands. Sometimes our listeners want more support than a podcast can give, individual or couple support, which I provide as a certified financial therapist, accredited financial counselor, and fair play facilitator. Details can be found at modernhusbands.com. Today's guest is Dr. Ann Welsh, a licensed clinical psychologist and certified executive coach who began her career as a psychologist at Harvard University before founding her own practice supporting ambitious women and working parents in thriving both at work and at home. She is the author of Ambitious Mother: From Surviving to Thriving in Your Career and at Home. The episode discussion highlights the importance of redefining ambition beyond traditional career success and provides practical advice for couples who are seeking a more balanced approach to family and work life, challenging societal norms about gender roles. Enjoy the show. Dr. Wells, I have to say, you might be one of two repeating guests. This is your second time on the Modern Husbands. So welcome.
This is an honor. Thank you. I'm glad to be back.
Well, we are pumped to talk to you. I know your book is coming out right around the corner. Ambitious Mother: From Surviving to Thriving in Your Career and Home. And you're probably wondering, listeners, wait, hold on. I'm a guy. Why would I listen to this? Clearly, there are women that listen to the podcast, but if you are a man listening to this, understanding from your perspective what is most important will help you be, as a man, a great teammate for your partner. So please stay tuned and understand that this is going to be an invaluable episode for you. And with that said, I think we should just dive into talking about the book itself. Can you share an overview about the book?
Yeah, Ambitious Mother is a mixture of explaining why working parenthood and working motherhood has gotten so hard, right? So it starts with some background, the context. How did we get here? And then it moves into talking about what can we do about it internally? How can we make some shifts ourselves? And then it also talks about some of the systemic pieces. So what can workplaces do? What can male partners do? But woven throughout that is also a lot of clinical storytelling from my work with clients, some personal storytelling, some interviews with better known actual ambitious mothers. And I think to your point of why should men even pay attention to this episode? Two things. One, like you said, being a better partner, but two, a lot of the concepts that I talk about apply to fathers as well, because at its heart, I'm talking about broadening ambition and moving from this idea that the only way to be ambitious is to kind of climb the career ladder, and thinking about ambition as something that exists on a wider web where there's room for pivots and changes and rest, and, kind of reframing ambition from power and status only to ambition for connection or for care or for growth or impact or anything else that we could put our kind of desires towards, right? So even though it is a book for mothers, there's a lot, I think, in the messaging that fathers can take as well.
Awesome. And I love books that have, good storytelling, because I think they convey the messages, the concepts so much better. And you can relate to, you can put yourself in the story and you remember the story more.
Right.
Right. As you were going through this process, how did becoming a mother change the way you thought about your own ambition and your own identity?
Yeah, before becoming a mom, I never questioned my ambition. I was pretty ambitious. I had seen both of my parents worked, and I'm sure this will come up a couple of times. My mom was a doctor, and so was my father. And I always thought I would be a working mom and would have a big career. And even at some career inflection points before parenting, it was always a question of what do I want to do, not whether or not I was ambitious. And when I became a mom, and more specifically, when I kind of made a career pivot around motherhood, that was the first time where it felt really complicated. When I had my second kid, I was working at Harvard. it was the dream job. I had, done all of the work to get there, and I enjoyed the work too. It really felt like kind of my ambitions had paid off, and yet something wasn't working. My husband was traveling a lot for work. He also had a big job. And my oldest, who was 2 at the time, eventually he was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and ADHD, but we didn't know that. And I was just kind of slowly drowning. And when I decided I needed to leave Harvard, it was a huge identity rupture, right? How do I walk away from the job I thought I wanted? And I kind of clung to like former Harvard, and the psychologist title is this life raft. And the reality was, at first I was building a private practice, seeing like a handful of clients on Saturday mornings while my husband had the kids. And it felt like this fear of, am I not ambitious anymore? What does this mean about me? We had no language at the time. This was 15 years ago, around taking a career pause. It just felt like I was adrift. But I think what became clear then over time for me was that I didn't become less ambitious, right? It just expanded into all of these other dimensions. I still really wanted meaningful and impactful work. It just wasn't at Harvard, right? I also wanted space and connection, to time to be with my kids. And so that, I think, was the very early stages of recognizing this shift in how we think about ambition and how motherhood plays into that.
What was there like a specific moment, or was it more of like a series of moments or experiences, like you realized the way you were striving wasn't sustainable?
Yeah, I think it was like a slow feeling of drowning almost, right? It didn't feel like a dramatic breaking point at first. It felt more like I was kind of grasping tighter and tighter over time. As I mentioned, at that point in my career, I was seeing 60 clients a week at Harvard in my 40-hour-a-week job. I had this toddler at home that was struggling.
That's excessive.
Yeah. I was pregnant with my second kid. And from the outside, I really think about it these days and look back and say, I looked like I was managing, right? I was seeing the clients. I was on it. I had my notes done. I would come home. I would get dinner. But I felt like I was holding my breath all the time, right? It was this sense of like cringing, waiting for even a little thing to throw me off. And I wasn't parenting the way I wanted to be. Like, I was short-tempered. I was tired. I was always stressed. And I got to this point where I didn't want out of my work, but I knew something had to change. And then that was the moment, because as I was starting to head out on maternity leave for my second, I thought maybe the solution is that I reduce my hours. And I thought I made a very reasonable ask. I asked if when I came back from leave, I could go part-time, even temporarily, to see what that felt like. Because I really wanted to be able to stay. And the answer was not only a hard no, it was pretty dismissive. It was, part-time's too logistically complicated for us, and there are about 500 other people waiting for your job. So you can kind of take it or leave it. And so that was the moment where I said, all right, if that's my choice, then I have to leave, right? And it wasn't, again, that I lacked ambition. It was just that there was no room in the system for me to adapt or change. And when it came down to it, am I choosing my mental health and my family over this particular work environment? Yes. And I stayed at work. Like I said, I started my private practice. And so I was really fortunate that I was able to do that. But it was this moment, I think, of I tried at that point everything to stay, and it wasn't going to work out because of the systemic stuff in place.
So let me ask, like, once you did make that decision to change, like, how did you feel about that? Like, I almost imagine there would be relief, but given like everything you said, like, I'm getting a little bit of panic or anxiety about all the work you said you were doing. So.
Yeah, I mean, it was both, right? It was there because I left and then promptly went on to have a second kid. So work was there in a different way. And that particular child, I don't think he slept for more than an hour at a time for the first 6 months of his life. It was brutal. But I did find one thing in those initial months was, without work and kind of in the early stages of building this other thing, I still kind of resorted to overwork and over efforting almost as a way to like prove I was still invested. And that's where that deeper identity shifting stuff had to start to happen. And that's slower, deeper work. That's the nature, right, of psychological change. So yes, relief on some level, but at the same time, it was probably the start of almost bigger work in some ways.
So you've worked at Harvard, you're an author, you're a mother of 4. What's the most important role that you've played in your life?
I mean, I think it would be the mom piece, right? And everything else I do circles around that. But I think a little bit more broadly, at this point, my work is all about mothering mothers, right? So I did a certification that was pretty lengthy in maternal mental health, maybe 10 years ago now. And my entire work life has been around supporting moms, right? We talk a lot about how to support kids and what's best for our kids, and we ignore the moms. And so everything I do, whether it's the clinical work, whether it's my group coaching programs, whether it's the book, whether it's the work I do with companies, it's all kind of around, it's like spokes on a wheel, and at the hub is mothering, period. Mothering my own kids, yes, and also mothering mothers and supporting them in that way.
I asked that question because when Catherine O'Hara passed away, she was in Schitt's Creek, and one of my favorite movies, Home Alone 1 and 2. Yeah. She's the mom, Kevin. She was asked, there was a video that resurfaced, and she was asked what the most important role was in her life that she played, and she said being a mother. And some people are actually criticizing her for that because she was such a success in her career, and I take exception to that. I think that's wrong. I think that when somebody answers a question that way, they should be celebrated, just like Matthew Stafford was celebrated after he lost in the playoffs. And the first thing he thought of was his own children. The first thing he did when he got home was tuck them into bed. And when he's asked, what's your most important role? He's going to say being a father. And I feel like that we're at like this inflection point, which you're writing about in your book, where women who have been fighting against the patriarchy and the gender pay gap for so many years, that when they hear questions like that oftentimes they get a little bit sensitive because they almost take it as if, wait, my career matters too, where men are on the other end of that. And there's a lot of men, and I'm one of them, that maybe has regrets about the amount of time he spent away from his family and working to fit into that system. But those men are being celebrated for being fathers first. And I'm glad that you said that, because I feel like that we should all get to the point where when someone's asked that question, the first response should be as a mother or a father, as a husband or a wife, and then your career. And that I'm hopeful that for our listeners who are trying to balance all of these things in their lives, that they keep their priorities straight. And the first thing that has to come is family. So anyhow, Bruce, I just had to interject.
No, I think that also goes back to like kind of this discourse around, like societal discourse around identity, like you were mentioning. Yes. It, like, who are you? And like wrapping yourself in this Harvard psychologist like identity.
Yeah. And go ahead. I was just gonna say, I think that, part of what I love about my work, and I'm, again, really lucky in this way, is that it is a really natural overlap, right? Like the learning that I do to be a better clinician, to be a better coach, makes me a better parent. The way that I've had to learn about, in particular, my, ADHD and neurodiversity to support my kids makes me a better therapist and a better coach, because I understand how brains work. So, right, for me, there's almost like it's impossible to pull them apart. But I think that's actually true for most of us, right? We start to talk about these things as opposite, kind of opposing forces in our life. And what I encourage people to do, and part of what's at the heart of the book, is we have to stop doing that, right? We are kind of holistic people, and we are parents and employees or leaders or whatever else it is that we do. And my work exists in the overlap of that Venn diagram. And that's true for men and women, right? Like, I want my daughter to grow up in a world that she gets both. I also want my 3 boys to grow up in a world where they get to be caretakers and prioritize that. Like, one of my sons, who is, he's 15, he's like 6'2", he can pick me up, right? He wants to be a dad. Like, he wants to be a dad and maybe also a teacher. That's what he wants to do. And to me, that's a parenting win, right?
Yes.
Because he has permission to envision that and be supported in that. So it's not just about women, right? It's about people.
Listeners have told us that they love the ideas we share on our podcast to manage money in the home as a team, but want more help than one episode can provide. That's why I'm excited to announce On the Same Page Consulting for corporations, couples, and individuals. Visit modernhusbands.com and click Our Services at the top of the page to learn more about how I can help you or your employees manage money in the home as a team. Again, that's modernhusbands.com. Now back to the show.
And
Yeah,
it's
no,
interesting that you brought up size because Bruce is 6'4",
6'3.5".
There you
6'3"
go.
and a
We
half.
can round to 6'4",
I'll
but
round to 6'4". I'm
I'm
6'3".
the shortest in my family, so like the 6'3.5" is important.
Yeah.
When you see Bruce and I, you're like, those are some big dudes, and they would never think that we're having conversations like these, and that we value what we value because of how we look. And it's interesting how society looks at bigger guys and they make those assumptions, and then there's pressures as a result of that. So it is a big win that your 6'2" son's like, you know what, I can't wait to be a father, I can't wait to be a school teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And getting, you mentioned, like, this is all about supporting mothers, right? And you've said the men in your life have been very supportive. They've been very involved. But yet you've still ended up with sometimes an unequal division of labor. Can you walk us through like how that happened? What was that process?
Yeah. And I think this is important because humans are very inertial, right? We do things because it's the way that we've done them. But as I mentioned, both my parents worked, and my dad, my mom was a physician at a hospital, whereas my dad had a private practice. So he sometimes had more flexibility than she did. And so he had Tuesdays off. And Tuesdays were the days that dad scheduled all the pediatrician appointments and the dentist appointments and the orthodontist appointments, all the appointments. He cooked dinner. Cooking, I use the term lightly. It was usually takeout, but he provided food. And he picked us up from school. And in the summers, he did really, like, we would get to go to the museums and the beach. It was really fun. I loved Tuesdays with my father. And he was always the biggest supporter of my interest, especially in science, and a huge supporter of my own mom's career. So, while my mom was still the primary parent, kind of the other 4 days a week, we're talking about 1980. This was not like the norm at all among my peers. And when I got married, my husband very much, supported my career. We were planning on both having big careers. We were in grad school at the same time. There was always this kind of lockstep about how we wanted to pursue our jobs. But I think what happens is, even when we have these goals, we get into parenting and we are tired, very tired. And there's so much external force pushing us back towards what kind of the overall gender expectations are that might be different than how we anticipated. And so when you're tired and when you're stressed, we just kind of go on the well-worn path because that feels easier. And I truly think that's what happened, right? We are exhausted and the baby's crying and I just get up and do it. And then my husband lets me, and then I start to figure out more quickly what helps this crying baby. And, I'm the one that can nurse. So then I will always soothe the baby. And right, like it's these little teeny tiny things that start to add up. And then when I left Harvard, I think that was a huge push towards me being the primary parent only. And it wasn't until, a couple years later that we really made very conscious shifts to get things back on track. And I won't say, it's not that he was uninvolved or unsupportive, but there was very much this gendered component coming from both of us, because we weren't really intentionally doing it differently. And it takes so much of that intention to shift against, hundreds of years of gendered patterns.
Yeah. So you're saying even when there are these like shared values around equality, like, and we have good intentions, we get stuck on these old patterns. And we keep this just because life is busy. We get stuck in it. We revert back to what we've had in our past experiences or past generations. Um,
Yeah. And I think it also comes from, for men to go against these patterns, there needs to be like extra effort, right? Like they need to kind of
mm,
add in responsibility, not just tasks. And so that takes some activation energy.
so for
And
us
I,
men, how do we do that?
I think that it's exactly that, right? It's saying, I am going to proactively take on more tasks. I'm going to operate under the assumption that I am doing less than half. Because I think what happens is we see in couples a lot of times where dads are doing way more than their fathers, right? So much more, huge amounts of progress.
Mhm.
And this is really important. It's still not
Yeah,
close to half in
it still
terms
may
of
be like 40-60 or
right. But so I think they're looking backwards and saying, hey, where like, where my applause? Not in a hurtful way, but just like, look at me, I'm doing great. And women are saying, but I'm still holding, 70% of the load. And that's still a lot more than your 30% or whatever it is. It's not exactly about the numbers, right? But there's
right.
that's where the gap is that I think couples are often missing communication. And so for men, it's a lot of saying like, okay, I'm going to just operate under the assumption that that's true and that there's more I can take on, and really kind of actively taking on the conceptualization of the tasks, right? The CEO level household work, not just the give me the list and I'll do it. And then really taking responsibility for that. Not I'll get to it on my timeline, but I will actually take on the responsibility from top to bottom for this thing and get to it on a timeline that works for us as a family.
Yeah, well said. So for someone that's listening and they feel stretched thin right now, and they're not really sure where to start, where do you usually suggest they begin?
Yeah, so this is a great question. I think sometimes when we're in that place, we look to the quick fix, right? They want the solution. Just tell me, I'll sign up for this, Notion dashboard and it'll organize my life and then I'll be great. Or I just need to start waking up at 4 a.m. and everything will be perfect. But it's not so much about solutions, it's about clarity, right? And so if you're feeling stretched thin, one way I like to tell people to start is to do what I call like an identity closet clean out. And I don't know how many of your men listens will relate to this, but for women, right, kind of you're cleaning out your closet, right? You know the process. You take everything out, you put it on the bed, you figure out what fits, what doesn't, what you like, and you get rid of everything else. So it's not taking up emotional or physical space in your house, but you can kind of do this with identity, right? And it's this idea of listing every role that you play and what are the expectations I'm carrying around about that role. So as a mom, what's society telling me to do? As a daughter, as a sister, as an employee, as a leader, and like listing all of that. And what I find is when I have clients do this, that list gets real long, real fast.
Yeah.
Then you label, where am I getting this from? And also, do I actually believe it? And that's the part that's really, really important, right? So just like in a closet clean out, you find that itchy sweater from grandma, it's itchy. I'm not comfortable in it. I'm going to get rid of it. I don't need to hang on to that. Right. And so you only kind of put the expectations back in the closet, so to speak, that are the ones that fit for you, your family, and your kind of unique set of needs. And that starts to feel lighter, right? Because you're thinking about what actually fits my life right now. Where is like my desire and how does that fit in? And also, if we're talking about your family and kids, you know your kids better than any expert out there about what's working. And so kind of owning these are the things that fit us together. And these are the things I'm letting go of can just give you some more space, right? Once you have that clarity, those systems and solutions and stuff, they start to stick and make a little more sense.
I love that metaphor of like the closet clean out. Now, I'm not one to clean out my closet unless I'm like forced to. But I love the metaphor and really just keeping what is yours, you have ownership with, and want to continue to have ownership with. I love that. As you're going through all this, if you could go back and talk to your earlier self about ambition, about motherhood, about identity, what would you tell your younger self?
I mean, I think I would start, to the ambition piece of saying like motherhood doesn't have to compete with your ambition. It can be a big part of it. But more broadly, I'd give her permission to take up more space, right? I think so often women are told, get small and shrink yourself, shrink your desires, your wants, your goals, and that's how you're a good mom. Don't have needs, put the kids first and do everything for them. And in that shrinking, we're actually doing our kids a disservice because then we're not fully present in our lives, right? And so I would give her permission to take up a whole bunch more space and have, stop thinking about what do you deserve and start thinking about what do you desire. You're allowed to have that. I think I spent a lot of time in my early motherhood questioning and doubting and wondering and blaming myself for a lot of things. And I wish that I had kind of been able to see at the time how much more important it was to take care of myself, and that care for myself was actually part of how I care for my family.
I mean, and thank you so much for sharing all these great tips for our listeners, for us, and really, I think having a better understanding of some of these changes that mothers are going through, and that their ambition just can look a little bit different. It doesn't go away. It just refocuses. So for those that are interested, as I'm sure they will be, where can our listeners learn more about you and purchase your book?
Yeah, you can purchase it anywhere books are sold. And if you grab it before its release date on the 6th, there are some exciting pre-order goodies that you can find all about on my webpage, which is just drannwelsh.com. And you can also usually find me hanging out on LinkedIn and Instagram as well.
And we're going to put in the show notes a link to that, drannwelsh.com, and where you can purchase it. So if you go to modernhusbands.com, you can find that, or on our YouTube channel. We love to leave our listeners with one piece of simple and actionable advice based on our conversation today, based on what you understand, based on what you wrote about in your book. Mm-hmm. So knowing that, what is your piece of advice?
Ooh, good question. I would say, ask yourself what you want today, what you truly want, even if it's something as simple as what do you want for dinner, and let yourself have it, right? I think so often, I totally do this, right? What do the kids want for dinner? What does my husband want? Okay, we'll just have something that fits there. Instead, what do you want to eat? And start kind of exercising that muscle of naming it and then giving it to yourself.
I can't remember the last time I asked myself that when I prepared dinner. It's always, what can I prepare that will cause the least arguments amongst my picky children?
Yes.
And yeah, that's interesting. I will take you up on that. I'll let you know how it goes. But if that doesn't work, maybe what I want is a small glass of bourbon after dinner. Is that okay?
Yeah, that works too.
Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Welsh.
Thanks for having me.
Don't leave just yet. Be sure to like and subscribe before you do. And a reminder to visit modernhusbands.com if you're looking for money and home management support in your life. Just click the Our Services button at the top of the page. Again, that's at modernhusbands.com. And many thanks to our co-hosts, our guests, and of course, all of you for joining today.